Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. In this video, we're going to talk about Acts chapter 7. We're in FSI number 24, and we're in Acts chapter 7, and we're also going to have a discussion about the concept of Moloch and how that is relevant to us today, and how people today are sacrificing their kids to Moloch, as Stephen mentions in this passage. I want to thank everybody who supports this channel. We cannot do this without you. In order to produce the content that we do here, we have to set aside time, space, and resources, and that is expensive. And if you would like to see more or see this kind of content continue, and you know that this content isn't like other content that you find on the web. We're not copying anybody. It's not like anything else. We're not mimicking anything else. We're doing live exploratory thought combined with epistemology and distributed cognition. It's not like something you can find anywhere else, okay? So we're not just mimetic propagators. We're exploring the truth together. If you'd like to see that continue, I appreciate any support that you can provide to this channel, and you can do so. The details are in the description below if you would like to partake in that, and we'd appreciate that. In Acts chapter 7, we're in the middle of Stephen's narrative, and the setting is that Stephen is in the middle of the council. He's talking to the council, and he's been called on the carpet for saying disruptive things, and they call him up and they say, "Are these things so?" And Stephen's answer, and we've covered all the details of this in previous sessions, Stephen's answer includes this rather lengthy, and I think this is the longest sermon other than the Sermon on the Mount. It's the longest sermon from anybody other than Jesus, and I don't think it's longer than his, because it's Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And then there's the Olivet Discourse too later. But I think this is the longest sermon other than Jesus' sermons that we get anywhere in the Bible. So that's something to consider. So he goes on this rather lengthy discourse throughout the history of the history of Israel, history of the Jewish people, and the history of their religion, those kinds of things. And we've talked at length about why he would do that. And essentially, one of the main points is to legitimize Jesus of Nazareth as, in fact, being the Messiah. Jesus is the Messiah, and he can go through the history and show through the shared history that they all consider to be relevant and authoritative and valid. He can use that, tie Jesus to certain things key people said, like Moses predicting the prophet that came, and say, Jesus is this prophet. So that's one of the things that he's trying to do here. And also, at this point in history, this is one of the last chances, as far as we understand, that the council is going to have a chance to receive Jesus as a Messiah on behalf of Israel. So when you and I talk about receiving Jesus, getting saved, getting converted, born again, those kinds of things, those kinds of phrases that we use, we're talking about individual things, all right? Your personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You hear things like that, okay? What's going on here is way different than that. This is not individuals that need to be converted. So individuals could be converted. And we find out that later on, some of these individuals actually do get converted later on in the book of Acts, all right? But what has to happen is Israel needs to officially receive Jesus as Messiah. That's what needs to happen in order for the tables to turn for Israel. That's what needs to happen. So it's a different kind of audience. It's a different kind of approach. If you were presenting something to a group of people and you were hoping that some individuals would become persuaded or make decisions or trust Christ, something like that. But if you had to convince them as a body to do something, like the city council or the Senate or the Congress or something like that, if you have to convince them as a body to act in one accord to do something, that's what Stephen has. That's what the order is. They're up against a tall order. They have to do this thing. And they have to be presented with an opportunity. It has to be a witness to them that Jesus Christ is the Messiah. And this ties into all kinds of things, like when Jesus heals people, he tells them, don't go say anything to anybody, go show yourself to the priest. So everything that's being done is as a witness in accordance with the law, in accordance with the valid structures that are in place, the established structures, and those sorts of things. They're trying to appeal to do things the right way. So in the middle of this history, right about we talked about Moses a good bit. Stephen is right about the time where Moses is leading the children of Israel out of Egypt, and he's at Mount Sinai. He's getting the 10 Commandments, those kinds of things. In verse 39, it says, "To whom our fathers would not obey, but thrust him from them, and in their hearts turned back again to Egypt." So in their hearts they did, right? "And they said unto Aaron, Make us gods to go before us. For as for this Moses, which brought us out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him." And what is, you would, like we know not. You would say wit. He doesn't have his wits about him. You're a half-wit. So we use the word wit today. It's not an archaic word. And to conjugate it, plural, we know, like current, like to make it a verb would be to we know not, we are not aware of, where we don't have the wits to discern what has become of him. We wot not what has become of him. We don't know what's going on. Why is he up there in this mountain? We don't know what's going on. And they made a calf in those days and offered sacrifice unto the idol and rejoiced in the works of their own hands. Well, let me go up here and see what kind of notes I had. By the way, he says, they say up here, make us gods. That is plural, and that corresponds in Exodus chapter 32, verse 4, where after he made the golden calf, he makes this statement, "These be thy gods, O Israel." But there's only one golden calf. Why does he say that plural? Okay? So that's kind of strange. Now, in Exodus 32:8, lower right-hand side, same thing. "These be thy gods. They have made them a molten calf and have worshipped and sacrificed. These be thy gods, O Israel." And up here in our text, "make us gods," plural, before us. And if you go to Jebel Laws, where the historic Mount Sinai is, you'll see these inscriptions on the walls. So it kind of, if you piece two and two together, if you look at the plurality of gods, and the artifacts that are actually at the site, it looks like, in addition to the golden calf, they also had depictions of other kinds of things there. That could be an explanation for that. That's just a little background information in case you want to search into that a little further. "And they made a calf in those days, and they made a calf, and offered sacrifice unto the idol, and rejoiced in the works of their own hands." Now, this phrase, "rejoice in the works of their own hands," is a phrase that's a preparatory. Stephen is strategizing here, and he's going to connect something. So, when Stephen was accused in Acts 16:13, they set up false witnesses, which said, "This man ceaseth not to speak blasphemous words against this holy place and the law." So they're really upset with what Stephen's saying about the place. Of course, they're taking him out of context and all this kind of stuff. They're trying to set up double binds and get him in trouble, trying to map him to something negative as much as they possibly can. And what Stephen is going to do in Acts 7:47 through 50, he connects the temple to also something made with hands. So the place precedence is set in Acts chapter 6, verse 13. And at the end of Stephen's delivery here, but he says Solomon is going through the history, gets to the point of Solomon. Solomon built him a house, built a temple. "Howbeit the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands, as saith the prophet, Heaven is my throne, earth is my footstool. What house will you build me, saith the Lord, or what is the place of my rest? Hath not my hand made all these things?" So God's like, I made all these things, and you're trying to impress me with just synthesizing them together into this shape? My hand made all these things. So God does not dwell in things made with hands, and that's the point that he makes. So Stephen, the language here seems to connect the original accusation from the false witnesses, and he wraps it up here in verse 48, "Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands." And here we are in verse 41, where he says, "Rejoiced in the works of their own hands." And you can imagine, if this is the case, could be coincidental. I'm guessing that he's tying these things together. I can't prove that, but it would be interesting if when Stephen, we don't have everything in the text. And what I mean by that is, like, it doesn't tell you what the gestures are or anything like that. And the gestures could mean everything. So Stephen could say something like, and they made a calf in those days and offered sacrifice unto the idol and rejoiced in the works of their own hands, and do some kind of gesture like this, and it could be any gesture. And then later on, when he says, but Solomon built him a house, howbeit the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands, something like that. So if Stephen were to do something like, and I'm just making up a gesture, could be anything, right? But the point is, there could be some kind of gesture that he used that tied these things together, that made it obvious that he's connecting these things and accusing them of being just as wicked as the people who built the golden calf. Okay? So just something to think about. I can't prove any of that, but if I see myself going through the story, that's kind of how I envision something like that happening, right? The Bible is true, but it's not exhaustive. In other words, there are definitely things going on there that it doesn't tell you. Like, there's probably flies buzzing around somebody's head. There's probably beads of sweat dripping down somebody's back at the time. There's probably a kid running around yelling somewhere. There's so many things going on that affect things, all right? And then, like, gestures would, the way, the delivery, and we just get the text here. But you can use pauses, gestures, an increase in voice, a decrease in voice. You can use these kinds of things to call people's attention, like delivery dynamics, if you will. Thinking in musical terms now, to call people's attention to information in an emphasized way. And so it's difficult to capture that if you just have the text of what they said. You don't really know how it was delivered. So I kind of like to think through a few different delivery techniques that may have been used. I don't know. Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. By the way, I'll show you where I am right over here. As it is written in the book of the prophets, O ye house of Israel, have ye offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by the space of 40 years in the wilderness? And so these phrases down here, Stephen is talking about what's happening in the wilderness, Mount Sinai, golden calf, that time frame. Now we know what's about to happen. What actually happens is the people who worship the golden calf, they get dealt with rather swiftly. So at this particular point, God does not give them over, does not give up and turn them over to worship the host of heaven for any length of time. These people get dealt with. And these people, the perpetrators, get a chance to repent and they get killed. Go back and read the book of Exodus. So this does not go on, this rebellion here does not go on in perpetuity. It gets dealt with right away. So the cross references for these phrases and this, O ye house of Israel, they're about things that happen much later. So Stephen is kind of, what he's doing is he's using the golden calf as a case in point. And then what he quotes in these next two verses, in verse 42 and 43, seems to abstract out that golden calf was a microcosm of the same repetitive kind of behavior that kept happening throughout the rest of Israel's history as he continues to tell it and kind of skips over it. So he gives you a summary basically here of that kind of thing continuing, turning to idols instead of to God. So these things in verse 42 and 43 did not necessarily happen in that narrative at Mount Sinai, okay, but they continued to happen throughout the history. So for example, turn, okay, so let's chase down a couple of these cross references for this word turn here. You can look at Joshua 24:20. If ye forsake, now notice that word if ye forsake the Lord God and serve strange gods, then he will turn and do you hurt and consume you. After that, he hath done you good. Okay? The word if there is telling. If Calvinism were true, it would not say any of that. It would say, if God has given you an eternal decree of reprobation, you will be consumed, and if not, you won't be. That's all it would need to say if Calvinism were true, but there are no passages that say that. So that if all the if statements like that are pretty telling, and they're conditional. If is a conditional word. If you do this, this will happen. If you don't do this, this will happen. Ezekiel 18, Ezekiel 33, Romans chapter 10, verse 9. If thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, shalt believe in thy heart that God raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. If. Okay? There are no passages that say if you have an eternal decree of reprobation, you can't get saved. There's nothing like that. There's nothing that ever like Calvinism attributes people who perish to that. Scripture never does. Not one single time, ever, not any combination of times, ever, never, in any passage, in any context, or removed from any context. It never says that. But he gives this conditional statement here. He says he gave them up to worship the host of heaven. In Psalm 81, there's a reference to this, but my people would not hearken to my voice, and Israel would none of me, so I gave them up unto their own hearts. So, okay, it's conditional as a response to what they did. So I gave them up unto their own hearts' lust, and they walked in their own counsels. Now, when you see that word lust, think of our video that we did on afar attachment and how attachment can lead you to deception. And a person is tempted when they are drawn away of their own lust, drawn away of the things that they desire, the things that they're attached to and enticed. So I gave them unto their own heart's lust. And so, in other words, how about you go ahead and pursue that and see what happens? You know? Go ahead and see how you like that. Just let it play out. You want to kind of like a little kid. A little kid is fascinated with the cat, and the little kid wants to play a little rough with the cat. And, you know, you have a couple different options there as a parent. Now, you don't want the kid to hurt the cat, and you don't want the cat to hurt the kid, but, you know, there's all kinds of different teaching styles. A parent might be inclined to say, go ahead and pull that cat's tail and see what happens. Well, he might learn something he wouldn't forget. And that's the kind of thing. I'm gonna give them over to their heart's desire. Go ahead and let you play out this thing that you want to do so you can see how it winds up. And maybe then you will know. Now that's connected to what we're going to talk about in a few minutes. We're going to talk about the concept of sacrifice and Moloch. Okay, so bear that kind of thing in mind. Don't forget that. Gave them over to worship things. In Ezekiel 20:39, as for you, O house of Israel, thus saith the Lord God, go ye serve every one of his idols. Go ye serve ye every one his idols. And hereafter also, if you will not hearken unto me, but pollute ye my holy name no more with your gifts and with your idols. So he's okay. Go ahead, go pull the cat's tail. Go see what that gets you, and turn them over to worship the host of heaven. Those are a few references to this in Deuteronomy 4:19. Unless thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, shouldest be driven to worship them and serve them, which the Lord thy God hath divided unto all the nations under the whole heaven. Okay, so that's something that's from God. You worship the Creator, not the created thing. In Deuteronomy 17:3, and hath gone and served other gods and worshipped them, neither the sun, or the moon, or any of the host of heaven, which I commanded thee not. Does anybody worship in the host of heaven today? There's a book by D. James Kennedy that talks about the gospel and the stars, and it talks about the astrological symbol, the constellations. Not astrological symbols, but the constellations, and how maybe they told a story that is the gospel. Interesting book, worth the read. I actually found it in the trash can. And you say maybe it should have stayed there. Maybe so. But anyway, it's an interesting book, the gospel and the stars. But if you take that to the point, I have also talked to some people recently who and not just recently, but throughout my life, I've encountered many people who they really are into this astrology stuff. And then I've met some people who, like, the only thing they want to know about you when they meet you is what your sign is. And then they make all these kinds of assumptions and predictions about you just based on your astrological sign. That's almost like stereotyping as far as I'm concerned. That stuff's not an exact science. And also there's some evidence that even if there was something to that some shifts have happened and it's about 3 months off anyway. So maybe you should rework all that stuff. Anyway, that's kind of funny. But I also talked to somebody who's way more into it recently, and they're talking about the patterns of Saturn and Jupiter and which planet's passing which planet, and what all this means for what's going on in your life and how it relates to your astrological sign. And if you're this particular astrological sign and Saturn's in this relationship to Jupiter, and that means this is going to happen in your life, that kind of stuff. I'm like, wow. How much of that do you get in your life before that becomes worship? And it's curious to me. I approach it from the standpoint of curiosity. Like, what would make a person invest so much, like today in 2021, what would make a person invest so much energy into this? Okay. Because I don't know how you would handle that kind of thing. And some people just want to preach the error out of people. But I'm curious, like, why would an intelligent person who can make a good living and et cetera and so forth be so caught up in this kind of stuff, And what does it mean? And what should we do about it? And what does that indicate? And is there something I'm missing? After all, the wise men did see a star, and that's how they found out that Jesus was there. All right. And then there's like, they shall see signs in the stars and the sun, moon, and heaven. And there's this stuff in the book of Revelation about stars and the sun and all this kind of thing that, back in 2017, that sort of stuff. So that's interesting. There is some stuff mentioned in Scripture about astrological things. So, what's our relationship to that? So something to think about. I'm not going to get too far into that. I don't have much to offer on it anyway. In 2 Kings 17:16, and they left all the commandments of the Lord their God and made them molten images, even 2 calves, and made a grove and worshipped all the host of heaven and served Baal. Now, what do we do today? We leave the commandments of God and we make images, we make patterns, models, schemas, systematic theologies, paradigms, ideologies. Well, that's what we make. We try to collect data and form a model in our mind, and instead of continuing to engage the complexity of the information afresh, we start substituting the model for reality. And I think that we are guilty of this same thing in abstract. We're not making molten images, but we are making ideological images, and we're bowing ourselves down to them. And I've said this kind of thing before. When people leave the church and they become atheist, I think there's a couple things going on there. I think that they're right and they're wrong. I think that they're right in the sense that they recognize that the God that people are bowing down to and worshiping in church is a synthetic image of God that is not the real thing. And they're rejecting that God. So they know that something is wrong, and they know that they need to defect from that, but they also don't know what the line of demarcation is. They don't understand. They have a low resolution of understanding. They don't understand the relationship between reality and language, and they don't understand the abstraction or the resolution or articulate. They don't have the capacity to articulate precisely what's wrong. So due to ineptitude on their own part, and I know that's quite a thing for me to say, but due to ineptitude on their own part, they recognize that something's wrong and they jump to the only response that occurs to them to do without recognizing that there's another way of going about it. You can actually reject the God that is synthesized in the minds of Christians in Western Christianity without rejecting the God of genuine, true, base reality. Okay? So differentiate those two, and instead of defecting and calling yourself an atheist, defect from that and go on an exploratory search to find out what it is Scripture was pointing at this whole time anyway that the church apparently missed. And we're making these images. In the image of God, we have this mental picture of God, all our statements of faith, our systematic theologies, are the things we think about, some kind of old bearded man in the sky, and the way people talk about God. I get involved in these discussions between Calvinism and Christianity a lot. And so the way people talk about God on all sides of that, and there are multiple sides, shows me that the people involved most of the time have never thought about what God is. And they've never realized how much of a substitute for God they are actually looking to that is just a model in their own mind, which is nothing like the God that Scripture is pointing to. And it's difficult. It's difficult to both stay awake to that and to help other people awaken to that, because the language is the same with different definitions, and it's difficult to disambiguate things when you explain something they can't see outside their model, and it's difficult for me to figure out how to crack the window open so that they can see outside the model. I don't always. Some people it works, some people it doesn't. So that's a ongoing exploratory set of skills that I wish I had better grasp of. For 2 Kings 21:3, for he built up again the high places which Hezekiah his father had destroyed, and he reared up altars for Baal and made a grove, as did the king of Ahab, the king of Israel, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. What does it mean to serve the host of heaven? And so when I hear people talk today, there's things like, hey, if Saturn is coming toward Jupiter, then you're going to get a raise and your court case is going to go well and your car's not going to break down and something good, that kind of stuff. And if you are connecting, these people aren't just they don't just have this inkling to bow down to these false idols. There's something else to it. There's some kind of synchronicity and connectivity that they are seeing or imagining of how worshiping these things makes their life better somehow. Like if you don't sacrifice your baby to Moloch, if you don't lay your firstborn son in the foundation of your new house and kill him that way, that's why the hurricane came and washed your house away. And, that can mess with a person's head for a while, if that's what they get told. Maybe you're worshiping the wrong God. Maybe Jehovah's not the right God. Look at how well we're doing over here. What we all did to make us so successful and conquer you, we all sacrificed our firstborn sons in the foundations of our house. And, oh, wow. Well, it looks like it worked out for them. See how confusing that could be? If you're bombarded with information with things like synchronicities and things that actually seem to be working out from that perspective. So there's something else to it. It's not just these stupid people bowing down to these inanimate objects just because they think that's, a good way to pass time. There's some motivational things to it. Now he says, it's written in the book of the prophets, O ye house of Israel, have ye offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by the space of 40 years in the wilderness. That comes from Amos chapter 5, verse 25 through 27. Have ye offered unto me sacrifices and offers in the wilderness 40 years, O house of Israel? But ye have borne the tabernacle of your Moloch and Chion, your images, the star of your God, which ye made to yourselves. Now we're going to mention that in a few minutes. Moloch and Chion. So in one hand, they're like sacrificing. They're going to temple and they're sacrificing these things, maybe on Saturday, But on Friday or Sunday, they're going over here to, on Sunday, they're going over here to Moloch and Kion and the star of their other god over here. They're playing both sides. And God's like, I see you sacrificing these things, but you're also doing this over here. You're double-minded. What's going on here? It's like somebody cheating on their spouse. Essentially what it is. And that is the exact analogy that gets used for Israel on multiple occasions. This 40 years thing comes up in Psalm 95:10. 40 years long I was grieved with this generation and said, it is a people that do err in their heart. They have not known my ways, unto whom I swear in my wrath that they should not enter into my rest. And then this shows up again in Hebrews chapter 3, verse 9. So there's this connection. In Hebrews, back to the wilderness time where they have the capacity to go into the promised land, but don't, and then they have to spend 40 years in the wilderness. The same thing, the parallel of that is that Jesus shows up and offers them the kingdom, and they could have gone into the kingdom the same way Moses and crew could have gone into the promised land. But they denied the Messiah. They denied Joshua and Caleb. Joshua is the name Jesus. There's a parallel there. They denied the testimony of Joshua, okay? And they have to wait 40 years. So they deny that in the New Testament, they deny the testimony of Joshua, Yahashua, Jesus, Yahshua HaMashiach. They deny the testimony of Jesus, and then they go into the wilderness for 1,878 years, and then later the promised land, the kingdom comes. When Jesus' second coming, he comes back and offers it to them again, and will take them into the kingdom. Joshua, Jesus, will take them into the kingdom the same way Joshua took them into the promised land after Moses. So notice the parallels there. There's like a first testimony and a rejection, and then a period of stand by and wait because you were rebellious and did the wrong thing, and then a second chance where Joshua takes them in. And when Joshua takes them in, he replaces Moses, and he supersedes Moses, if you will. And so when Jesus Christ of Nazareth comes, he also supersedes Moses as the person they should be following. But what are they doing? They continue following Moses, and as long as they're reading Moses, the veil of blindness is on their heart. Does that sound familiar? And then when they receive the Messiah, that veil is going to be taken away. And that's the condition of it. So Hebrews 3:9, when your fathers tempted me and proved me and saw my works 40 years, and then verses 15 through 17, while it is said, today if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation. For some when they heard did provoke, howbeit not all came out of Egypt by Moses. But with whom he was grieved 40 years, was it not with them that had sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness? And there's this connection. If you look in Hebrews chapter 3 and Hebrews chapter 4, there's this connection. There's a parallel there of getting the promised land offered the first time and rejecting it, and getting the promised land offered the second time, and it goes. Jesus comes and offers the kingdom the first time. They reject it. Jesus comes back, offers the kingdom again, and it goes. And that time is coming soon to a city near us. Verse 43. Yea, ye took up the tabernacle of Moloch, and the star of your god Remphan, figures which ye made to worship them. And I will carry you away beyond Babylon. So there's figures and talismans associated. Now, this god Moloch and the star of your god Remphan, we have a little more information here than in Amos. In Amos, it says, ye have borne the tabernacle of Moloch and Kion, your images, the star of your god, which ye made to yourselves. Okay. So we're not, we get a little more information here in Acts. And that's a good way to look at the Bible, is you see the information is supplemental, not contradictory. So the tabernacle of Moloch. What happens with the tabernacle of Moloch? You can trace this down in the Old Testament in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 7. Then did Solomon build a high place for Chemosh, and the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. Now, there's some places that say Molech is an error there in the Masoretic text, and it should be Milcon, but I don't pay much attention to that. There's other places in Leviticus 18:21. I guess I just say that so that you know that I'm aware of it, because if I don't say that I'm aware, I get a whole bunch of comments in the comment section or emails, and it's just a waste of time. And thou shalt not let any of thy seed pass through the fire to Molech, and neither shalt thou profane the name of thy God. I am the Lord. Now, they did some horrible things with Moloch. Sometimes it shows up as Moloch. Sometimes it shows up as Molech. There's no vowels in Hebrew, so they have vowel marking sometimes, which showed up later. So how a translator translates them is interesting sometimes. For example, chase down Nebuchadnezzar and look at all the different ways that gets spelled. That's interesting. Moloch is a god of fire. They would sacrifice their children to Molech, and there would be this, like, according to some accounts, there's this big bull creature statue thing, and it had this pan that sat over fire and heated up, like you would cook on or something like that. And they would bring the pan out, and they would I guess pulley system or chain or whatever, and the pan could be extended so it's not over the fire anymore, and it's out to where you can put something on it, and you put a baby on it, a living baby. You don't kill the baby first. You put a living baby on this searing hot pan, and then roll the thing back in there into the fire. Now, that's horrible. It's an absolutely horrible thing to think about. But we want to think of the abstraction of Moloch. And there is something that is analogous to this today. And no, I'm not going to talk about abortion. There's something that's analogous to this today. Moloch has been used figuratively to refer to a person or thing demanding or requiring a very costly sacrifice. Now, yeah, that's a Wikipedia quote, but it's a very common quote in other sources as well. Something that requires a very costly sacrifice. Now, I want you to follow the abstraction on this. If you listen to what Jordan Peterson says about sacrifice, like when he's talking about Cain and Abel, he says some very interesting things. And ultimately, you could if you look at it strictly from maybe a discovery point of view, because we don't know that they're, well, anyway. Sacrifice essentially is like a discovery of the future. It becomes evident that if you sacrifice something now, that it pans out better in the future. If you sacrifice some time to plant a seed and you cultivate it and water it and grow it, you can reap later on like fruit or vegetables that you can eat. Okay, so there's a sacrifice. You sacrifice the time and the effort now, and you get something in the future. So it's an abstraction that, like a discovery of the future. Now, I'm not an evolutionist or anything like this, but I do see analogous things to design building blocks, things like that. If you look at the way chimpanzees use tools, they can make a tool. They can make a tool to get into like a coconut. And then what they'll do is they'll get into the coconut and they'll leave the rest of the coconut and the tool behind. So they're not able to think about, hey, maybe that tool, if I want to get into a coconut again, I could save a lot of time making another tool and just use this one again to get into the next coconut or whatever it is they're trying to eat. So that kind of thing, it's like a discovery of the future. Like, I can sacrifice a little bit of time now and it will make my future better, so I don't have to keep sacrificing in the future. I don't have to keep making this tool in the future. I can just make it once and it can make my future better. Now I can just get into the coconut without having to remake the tool. If you sacrifice your time, effort, resources, and energy for college, the idea is that it will pay off in a higher paying job with more stability, that sort of thing. If you just have a job, the idea is that your future will be better because you can then have money where you can buy food and shelter and clothes, those kinds of things. So the idea is that you sacrifice in the present, you sacrifice to the future. So future is kind of like an abstraction of God in a way. Or God is an abstraction of the future. Now, I'm saying an abstraction so that you don't treat me like I'm acting as if they're fungible or interchangeable, or like I'm calling the future God. It's an abstraction of God. So the future is everywhere. God is everywhere. The future will judge you. God will judge you. And when you sacrifice something to the future will determine if it is acceptable to the future or not. So if you don't put your heart and will and effort and stuff into it, there is a chance that you have a much decreased chance that the future will smile favorably upon your sacrifice. So there's a legitimate relationship between sacrifice and a better future. And acting that out in a ritual is almost like a discovery of that, where you kind of know it, but you don't know how to articulate it very well, okay? So we can look back on these ceremonies and rituals and we can abstract out what the sacrifice means. Now, if you have something that sacrifices too much, like the sacrifice is too much, it's no longer commensurate. Like if I work pretty hard and I get, an orchard of oranges, that's probably worth it. I'm willing to work for that, okay? But if I work really hard and I only get one orange, so Moloch is like an abstraction of the sacrifice being much greater than the reward, or too much, okay? There's some disagreement theologically, I think right around 1935 or so, and you can look all this up on the web. Right around 1935 or so, some scholars and historians came out and decided that they thought that Moloch was not necessarily a reference to a deity, but was more so a reference to a type of sacrifice, like kind of sacrifice, like a very costly sacrifice. And you can go read about that. So that kind of goes back and forth. But the abstract in society is like, if you do everything you can so that your children can have a successful future, why would you want to sacrifice one of your kids and then put your kid through that horrible pain of being, burned alive on it? That's just a very horrible thing. So the abstraction is there. And what we're going to look at is the abstraction of that, of sacrificing your kids to something that just consumes them, and the sacrifice is not commensurate with the payoff. There is no payoff, as a matter of fact. The payoff is imagined and it's not really there. How does this happen today? There is an essay on the web called Meditations on Moloch. Now, before you go look it up and read it, it has some foul language. So I'm warning you. It has some foul language. Meditations on Moloch. And it talks about what Moloch is in the abstract. And it opens up with a poem, which also has some foul language in it. And one of the lines really stands out to me. Moloch, whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows. Moloch, whose eyes are 1,000 blind windows. I think Shakespeare said the eye is the window to the soul. And imagine 1,000 people and their eyes, which would be the window to the soul, but they're all blind, they're all blank, there's nothing in there. Because all those people have been sold out to something. You don't have 1,000 individuals. You have one thing that is controlling them like a zombie. So you don't have 1,000 things, you have Moloch. You have one thing. It's like the Borg. It's like a bunch of zombies. It's a bunch of people who've been programmed. It's like a bunch of computer bots. It's one thing, and all these people have outsourced their individuality and humanity to this one thing, and this one thing is expressing itself through them and is growing itself through them. So Moloch goes and makes itself bigger by the agents that comprise it, these blind windows, these 1,000 blind windows go out and they assimilate, if you will, other things into Moloch. It's not like if you ever watched the Matrix trilogy where Agent Smith eventually, spoiler alert, starts turning every other kind of being into Agent Smith. And that's what Moloch is like. It's this thing that you keep sacrificing to it, but there's never any payback. That never gives you anything back. It just takes, right? And my comparison of that is like to an ideology. You sacrifice your kids to an ideology, like, on this channel we deal with Calvinism a lot. And I would consider myself to have been ideologically possessed in my earlier days of being an independent Baptist. And it took me a while to wake up and climb up out of that. And so I could see that I was ideologically possessed. And then I spent some time as a Calvinist too. And I was ideologically possessed in a variety of different ways throughout my lifetime. And it took me a while to kind of wake up to the meta of ideological possession itself, rather than just any particular ideology that it happened to be. So regardless of what ideology it is, whether it's a social justice warrior thing or these race baiters or it's a political thing, regardless of what it is, or if it's in a religious world, it is this thing. Imagine the idea set, the idea complex is like this being, is like this creature, like a bacteria growing in a petri dish, and it just keeps absorbing all the other cells into itself to make itself bigger by means of assimilating them. That's what it is. And when you send your kid off to seminary or off to you sacrifice them to Calvinism. You sacrifice them to being an XYZ kind of Baptist or any kind of system really that has a propositional statement of faith. You're sacrificing the individuality, the aptitude and capacity for cognition and perspective and perception and transformation and growth and their capacity to have something to contribute back to the world. You're sacrificing all that so that this thing that already exists, this ideology which is already defined, can grow by the size of one more person. And so you just sacrificed your child to that. Now they are no longer an individual they don't even know what they think because they've outsourced all their sense making. I mean, look at the video, Calvinism and Subhuman Cognition. Go look at that video. A Calvinist or any ideologically possessed person, they don't know what they think. They don't have their own thoughts. They have been trained to set their own thoughts aside by a value system which treats their thoughts as not worthy of being considered because they would be prideful and arrogant if they did. And in exchange for these thoughts of other people, these other people created a system, and you should outsource your sense making to them and accept this prefabricated schema of propositions and just become another propagator of that meme. So now they've become a meme propagator. They're just like they're just like this kind of Pac-Man like thing that just goes and gobbles up, and they are no longer human. They're no longer that which makes us human. They're no longer exercising anything in the prefrontal cortex, the things that, I mean, humans, look how much progress humans have made and changed things. And the next generation of humans could change things that much more, but no, you've subserviated them to this ideology, which just eats them. And you sacrifice your kids to that thing. And so earlier we talked about having instead of making a molten image of a God, we have a mental image of a God. And that has a systematic theology that goes with it and a statement of faith. And we have all these things, this little model in our head of what God is, which isn't really God. We're bowing down and we're worshiping that instead of real God. And we're sacrificing our kids to it. And they are becoming ideologically possessed. They're just becoming these bots. And they become useless. And I already know whatever Moloch is, whatever the ideology is, it's only one viewpoint. It's only one perspective. To add another person to it to make it bigger does not add the number of perspectives. It outsources another perspective and contributes it to this one that already exists. So now we have, every time somebody becomes ideologically possessed, we have one less perspective in the world that could have given us insight, that could have done some exploration, some earnest search and discovery, and found something that could have helped us all. But we just sacrificed all that to the ideology. And now they don't know how to think. And they're not going to operate at the human level. They're going to operate at the level of this inanimate set of ideas that has eaten them. It has turned them into a propagator of that inanimate set of ideas and they are no longer human. We just lost them. They're gone. So if we had 1,000 perspectives in the world, now we have 999, and if it's every time somebody becomes ideologically possessed, we lose one more opportunity to have a perspective that could give us insight, that could help themselves and other people transform into being better people, more like Christ, if you will. Imagine that the person, haven't you ever had anybody tell you something that has helped you transform, that has given you insight, that has made your life better? Imagine that instead of that person giving you that information, they became ideologically possessed at some point and now no longer had access to the capacity to generate or see or discover that kind of information, because they're now just a propagator of this other perspective, which already exists and doesn't even need humans to articulate. It's just the thing, just an inanimate thing. And now you have to go without that insight and without that potentiality for transformation, because the opportunity for you to have that insight, which would help transform you, has been eaten by this thing. It's been sacrificed. That person, that insight, and the capacity, that generative capacity for relationality and insight is gone. It's been eaten. It's been sacrificed. It's out. It's no longer available. So every person who is ideologically possessed, like on this channel we deal with Calvinism. So everybody who is a Calvinist is one less opportunity to hear valuable insight that might help transform you than there could have been if they weren't ideologically possessed. In the essay, Meditations on Moloch, they talk about this thing. And by the way, warn you again, it does have foul language if you want to go look it up and read it. And this also has been misused by people to go against capitalism and everything else. So don't read into me mentioning things like this. Separate the signal from the noise, okay? But they mentioned this thing called a paperclip maximizer. And a paperclip maximizer is a machine, like a robot or a device, that its job is to do two things. Its job is to make paperclips and to increase its capacity to make paperclips. Okay? So it would consume resources to do this. So it would consume resources to make paperclips. At the same time, it would consume resources and it would construct another thing that's like itself that could make paperclips. Okay? But instead of but that capacity to increase the number of paperclips and increase its ability to make paperclips is recursive. You say, what's that? It's like compounding interest, but it's like compounding interest. So it keeps increasing its ability to make paperclips while it's increasing its ability to increase its ability to make paperclips. So it starts to grow exponentially and rapidly. And it finds out how to make things that can make it make more things like itself. So it's everything is geared toward turning everything into paperclips and increasing the rate and capacity at which you can turn things into paperclips. So pretty soon, the entire planet, all the plants and animals, all the people, all the resources, all the metal and cars and plastic and wood and trees, everything gets turned into paperclips. Planet Earth is gone, and this thing keeps doing its thing, and pretty soon it consumes the solar system and the galaxy and the entire universe. Everything is turned into paperclips, and all the machines that are making paperclips start to turn on themselves, and they start to make paperclips out of each other, and then pretty soon all you have left is just paperclips. Now, what good are paperclips if there's no paper to clip? All right? So you've sacrificed everything for nothing. And that's the abstraction of Moloch. It's like you sacrifice and get nothing in return. And when you think of Moloch, I want you to practice thinking in abstract terms. When you see things like this, now most of the time when you're in church and they talk about the idols that you place before God, and most time people talk about like material possessions, or like their work status or things like that. And yeah, those can be idols. Maybe you're in love with your car and you love it more than God, or your house, or or you're the boss at work or something like that, or your money. And yeah, that's fine, but that's low level thinking. There are things that proxy for God in our life that make us think we have correlation and correspondence with reality when we don't. We really have correspondence and correlation with this proxy that we have substituted for God. So it's not God that we're interacting with, it's this idea of God that we're interacting with. In our quest to understand human cognition and our ability to conduct cognition and process data, you also need to understand your capacity to deceive yourself. And in that, there's this concept of synchronicity. I was not planning on talking about this. With the concept of synchronicity, oddly enough, I think the leading person who's studying synchronicity, and what's synchronicity? It's the phenomenon whereby you encounter the same thing twice or often in rapid succession, okay? For some reason, there's certain numbers that recur in my life over and over and over again, and I keep seeing them, like certain ones. When I look at my watch, it's that certain time, and I always look at it when it's that time. I don't know why that happens. I learned a new word the other day in a conversation that I was having in the morning, and then in the next day, I heard that same word in a book that I was listening to. Things like that, things that connect, okay? And we can actually create synchronicities. It's almost like if you look at the work of Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, it's almost like you're extending your consciousness out and you're kind of discovering other things. Like if you buy a blue Toyota truck, blue Toyota Tundra, for example, all of a sudden you're going to start noticing a bunch of Toyota Tundras and a bunch of blue cars that are similar to yours. You're going to start noticing this more than you otherwise would have. And you might think that there's more of them, but actually now you're just noticing them more. So your salience landscape changes, and synchronicities are influenced by the changes in your salience landscape. So what am I trying to say? By the way, if you want to look into synchronicities, oddly enough, there's a synchronicity with, I think, the person who is the leading scientist right now studying synchronicities. The guy's name is Dr. Kirby Surprise. And that's not a joke. It's not a joke. It's his actual name, which is hilarious to me. Dr. Kirby Surprise. So maybe you want to go look up some of his information. Why am I telling you all this? I'm telling you all this is because synchronicities are a real phenomenon of human experience, regardless of whether or not you're a Christian. If you're exposed to things, or if you say something a bunch of times, or if you ask the universe for something, or pray to your cat, anything that crosses your mind and becomes salient to you has the capacity to generate synchronicities in your life. And it's very easy for that synchronistic capacity to be associated with the proxy of God that you have in your life and fool you into thinking that your relationship with this proxy of God is answering your prayers. When really what you're doing is you are engaging in a synchronicity enhancement salience landscape modification exercise without knowing it. Okay? So am I saying that God doesn't answer prayers? It's not what I'm saying at all. It's not what I'm saying at all. But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of things out there that we build models for God, and we worship those things instead of God, and then we convince ourselves that these inanimate things, which aren't even real, are being God back to us. And they're not. They're not. We're worshiping a false image. Might not be a molten image, might not be a graven image, but it's still a false image. It's still a false model of God that we put in our heads. So something that I'm constantly trying to do with myself is I'm constantly trying to, and I don't consider myself to be very good at this or very intelligent in this realm, but I'm constantly trying to find ways to break the frame of how it is that I'm thinking about God so that I can interact with Scripture afresh and with my own experience afresh without it being encumbered by presuppositional models and images of what I think or thought God was, but allow God to constantly and freshly, like tap water, just constantly reveal himself to me in a new way and reshape my perspective of exactly what or who God is. And I encourage you to raise your awareness of this kind of thing and to try to do the same thing and to recognize that without intending to, and what this will do is this will help you keep up with the change of things. And what do you mean by that? The Israelites here, the council, things changed. In other words, the Messiah showed up, okay? And instead of being in touch with God and realizing what God was doing and that God had sent his Messiah and here he is, and then we crucified and killed him, and then this guy, Stephen, is here telling us, instead of being in touch with God, they were in touch with a presuppositional image of God instead, so that when God does do something like send a Messiah, they didn't recognize it. They didn't recognize that as God because they're not worshiping God. They're not worshiping Jehovah God. They're worshiping something else. This mental image of God, this not a molten image necessarily, but a paradigmatic image of God that is proxying as God, which has a inflexibility and rigidity to it that doesn't allow for Jesus of Nazareth to be the Messiah. And that's what we do sometimes. We have this mental image and model of God that has an inflexibility and rigidity to it that does not, like God's trying to do something in your life, but our model of God does not allow for that. If we try to cast down the imaginations and the strongholds and our false models of God, when God does do something in our life, if we're constantly trying to stay in touch with the movement and flow of God, if we're constantly trying to have that relationship, then when God does make a move, we are sensitive to it. It's like being still and hearing that voice, and we're sensitive to that move. And then when Jesus of Nazareth gets sent and you're sitting on the council, you recognize that that's the Messiah. And whatever happens in your life here in March of 2021, or whenever you happen to be listening to this, whatever happens in your life, whatever change God brings along, you recognize it and you're able to incorporate that, include, what's the phrase that I'm looking for? But anyway, you're able to incorporate that into your forward progression of transformation and increasing your relationship with the true God, rather than seeing it as something to reject because it doesn't match the image of the model, the map of who you thought God was that happens to be incomplete and severely lacking. So it's like a daily thing where I would say of myself that probably every day by momentum, by mental inertia, accidentally keep making mental images of God. So I have to very intentionally try to break the frame of what those are so that they don't become my God. And I have to realize that tendency. Now I do think that if we hadn't been so propositionally programmed for the past few hundred years in our culture, it's the way we're conditioned in our culture to do certain things. I would think that it's possible in a perfect world, if you will, to have a culture where you don't make mental images that are false all the time, but you happen to be a more open person. Like if you look at the big 5 personality traits, you have openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. You could actually have enough openness so that like your entire culture could have enough openness to where it wasn't the default mode for people to be in to continually construe models of reality that were not consistent with reality, but were internally consistent. And then they don't respond to reality when it makes a shift, and then you are no longer able to adapt to the changing fitness landscape, which is what you want to do. So I guess we're just going to stop there because I don't know if you're following me on this, But I want you to follow the true God of Scripture. And I also think that you individually have the capacity to help me see where I accidentally have a model of God rather than being in touch with the real God. And I want to know what that is. I want that help from you. So, I mean, that's the reason we do it's the reason we do our Zoom sessions on Wednesday nights, Full Stature Initiative, so that we can share that. And I also know that if you become ideologically possessed, or if you are ideologically possessed, you will never be able to help anybody in that way. You will never be able to help anybody find their models and break down these groves and images and false idols and tear them down and turn back to the true and living God. You'll never be able to help anybody do that. And I think that each one of you, no matter who you are listening to this, you have the capacity to help people, but you cannot be sacrificed to Moloch. You cannot be sacrificed to an ideology and still help people. You have to break free. And as I try to break free of the models of God that I'm building in my mind and the images, and you are trying to break free, and then we are engaged in a distributed cognitive effort to try and break free together, we help each other do it in a better way. So this recursive maximization is toward breaking free, not toward being turned into paper clips. All right, I hope you follow me on this. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you, and good day.